everyone, welcome to another conversation on the Voice of the Marketeer, wherever you're watching or listening to this from. My guest today joins me all the way from Copenhagen and is someone whose work I have long admired. Meet Casper, the founder and the brain behind SparkForce, a leading agency in the Northern Europe B2B marketing space. For Casper and his team of digital experts at SparkForce, it's not really just about choosing the right marketing channels, but also about nailing the strategy every single time. With previous gigs heading up growth and marketing teams at some of Denmark's very popular unicorns like Templafy, Trustpilot, and United Fintech, Casper thrives on innovation, whether it's improving his own work or his clients. Casper, thank you so much again for taking the time to
That was amazing. I love that. That was a great intro. That was awesome.
Well, feel free to steal it. I will send it to
Ah,
you.
I'll steal it afterwards. I might use that again. That's great. That was good.
To kick this off, Casper, you've obviously now worked with a ton of B2B companies across stages and such, both on the demand generation, but also demand capture, what have you, right? Something I've learned in my own career is that the decision between brand and demand marketing has always come down to timelines, at least often has. Whether do you look at short-term performance marketing to show immediate ROI, or do you really invest in the upper funnel brand marketing to build awareness, what have you, right? But it turns
Yeah.
out that most brands can and ideally should do both,
Yeah.
in balance of sorts. So I think to begin with, I want your honest take on this whole brand to demand strategy that a lot of companies are adopting today, and what you think is probably a more optimal mix of sorts that keeps both the brand and the demand in check.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. I honestly first of all, I just want to say I'm really happy to see that. Because it's taken a while, right? I was a marketeer back when lead gen, especially. I like to use lead gen as like the counter to all this. Was all the rage, right? And like back when budgets were 80% on lead gen, 90% lead gen, something like that. I think one of the things, to be honest, was the kickstart of this. There was this like Binet and field research that was done by LinkedIn, or like some LinkedIn professors, and they essentially released that many years ago, actually. But it became like pretty rampant the last 5 years and changed the perception. And essentially, what they came up with is essentially you want to split it between around 55 to 45. So around 55% for branding and what we call branding, and 45% for lead gen. I think these days we're actually, like, most of the companies I work with, we're actually doing way more on the brand demand side of things than we actually do lead gen. And I think what is also, and you can give a lot of credit to people like Chris Walker and the sorts, because putting it on the map essentially is just saying, like, people don't really buy the same way they used to. Like, so especially in B2B, when you talk SaaS in general, like the whole buying process is just different, right? Imagine you have to go out and buy a piece of SaaS software today, right? Well, for me personally, what I would do is first I would ask on Slack, then I would go to one of the million communities I'm part of and say, hey, I'm looking to solve X problem, help me with this. I might do some search on Google. I might also ask ChatGPT even, right? And I might even find it through social. I might see on LinkedIn like somebody talk about it or somebody promote it and say, hey man, we've been using this tool XYZ. So the journeys are just different, right? And I think what we failed to do in the past was take the lead gen results and quantify them in a good way. Because what we said was just like, hey, let's just get a bunch of leads and then marketing has done their job. But now a lot of companies and a lot of marketeers now are more like, hey, what do we actually contribute with? The stuff we send to sales, the leads we produce, are they actually valuable? And that brings back from the whole predictable revenue model, that book way back, 20 years old these days or something. That started the whole MQL hamster wheel. Like, we just wanted MQLs, but at some point I think people realized MQLs could be almost anything, right? It could be my mom signing up for something, and that wasn't really valuable. It wasn't doing anything. Like, it sounded good on paper. It wasn't actually resulting in results. So, to your original question, I think it's a really good thing, and I think my stance is actually 45 for 55. As long as the counterweight is more towards demand side of things, brand side of things these days, that's actually where I am. That's actually what I do most of. That's where I sit. If that makes sense.
Interesting. I mean, in fact, I recently read a report. I can't quite remember the source, but it said over 60% of tech buyers today say that they prefer to work with established brands. So having that sort of brand familiarity and trust isn't just nice to have anymore. It's almost critical to closing the deal, right? So
Yeah.
I think spot on. Tell me, Casper, how do you today, like, through SparkForce, you obviously work with a lot of marketing teams and leaders and founders. How do you go about approaching, approaching a unified strategy of sorts, managing the balance between brand and demand, in a way that actually converts accounts faster?
Mm, that's a great point. So I think you always want to have initiatives that are like capturing demand and creating them. So I think that's like, and I think a lot of companies have a tendency, and like, there's a lot of tendencies in general to always be extremely black and white in things, right? So like you can only do one thing. Okay, like well, that's not the smartest always, right? So and I think a lot of the bashing is typically on like demand capture plays such as Google Ads and some Bing Ads or stuff like that, things that are lower in the funnel. But those things have a place. I think it's just been misused for a lot of time. Like there's a lot of companies that are misusing it because they're like, wait, we can see conversions here, we can't see conversions everywhere else, so we should keep doing the things we can see conversions on. Um, with that said, like one of the things I typically advocate for is just like doing some sort of, I call it a cluster strategy. So essentially just evaluating the different keywords across the whole table. So just getting like whenever we start working with companies in the strategy part, we always do this cluster strategy thing where we essentially just evaluate what are the search terms you're being found on, like what are the words that are pinging up, and either organic, paid search, or for your competitors, what are the words that are working. Then you can use that to either inform your own decision making on what content you should be producing, what you should be talking about, what you should be using for your paid search ads, but also just in generally like your direction. Is this even like, is there any intent here? Is there anyone searching for XYZ software? If there is, good. If there's not, then maybe you'd want to build a category, build demand first before you start capturing. So you want to typically, let's say you build a 12-month plan and you just start with someone and they have no idea what to do, right? You want to start out with the stuff that probably can produce results right now. That's the Google Ads side. That's the paid search. That's the lower intent. So essentially, just if you look at it from a classic funnel triangle perspective, you want to start with the things at the bottom. Like this, the things, the people who are already searching for your product software. And it's not going to be the most sustainable. It's not going to be the thing that works the best. But if you had never done marketing before, then it's a really good place to start because you can kind of validate if your idea even works. And then once you have that, then you can start, in the meantime, you can start building a more long-term demand place, right? Like building a funnel structure, creating content that suits the buyers and stuff like that, right? So to be honest, like it's a mixture of both, but it's very rare you don't have that mix. Like you have both. Same.
Right, interesting. And can you maybe speak to a specific example from one of your recent projects with clients that you thought was incredible in terms of approaching this sort of unified strategy?
Mm, well, most of them, like so. But I think what is more interesting is talking about when it doesn't work. I think that's actually a little bit more interesting because like there's a lot of companies where this works. Like we work with companies. Templafy is actually a customer, and that works really well. We work with Front, where it works really well. There's a bunch of companies where it works really well. But the interesting part is when it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, it's interesting for. I consulted a company. I can't name them here, but I consulted a company at some point, and they had been investing a lot of money, not with us, but with someone, another agency in paid search. Spend around 150,000 kroners, 20,000 euros, over 3 months. And for them, that was a lot of money. And they didn't get any results. Got 2 conversions, 3 conversions, or something. And then they asked me, "Hey, Casper, what's going on?" They asked their agency, and then the agency came and said, "Hey, guys, you want to essentially maybe you want to try some YouTube, you want to try some display advertising." And then they asked me, Casper, "Hey, Casper, what's going on? Why is it like it is?" And then I said to them, and now it's hard to explain the context without saying the name, but essentially what they do and what they did was they do some cloud security for Google platforms. And honestly, nobody at back then, at least, nobody searches for that. Like, there's no intent in that market because the problem is it's not a category. It doesn't exist yet. And it's like today when you and I, let's say we talk CRM systems, both and I CRM system, that's pretty defined category. Or But back when in the early days of Templafy, template management, document management, those categories weren't super well defined. And the same for this company that I'm referencing here, there wasn't a category. And when there's no category, search very rarely works. Like it doesn't really work because there's nobody knows what they're searching for. They might search for cloud security, but they don't know it's in Google, they need help with it or whatever it is. So the point is, if you don't have an established category, there's no real intent. People don't know they have a problem that you can solve. Then your low and like high intent stuff is not going to work. That's not a good approach to start off with. But then you have other cases. I've helped a fintech startup where it's like there was already competitors. They just had a new angle to the market, so there was already a category that was established. Well, here stuff like paid search works really well in the beginning because it gives you some traction initially, right? So it can work in either way, but I think it's important that you always have a category that you know there's intent in the market. Competitors is a really good indication that there's already someone that's like searching or knows your solution type of solution exists, right?
Very cool. And maybe I just want to double tap on something you said briefly, which is like just really putting your money where the mouth is, right? And I think there's a massive case to be made in terms of balancing budgets as well, because I think, and maybe there are two parts to this that I'd love for you to talk about. One, where there are smaller early stage companies in the B2B space that are strapped for cash, so have limited budgets. But then there are others, slightly bigger players who have enough money to have a more fairer allocation of investments between the brand and the demand side. Tell me, how would you typically approach both sides of the table, and what sort of strategies have worked for you?
Let's take the big ones first. So we actually recently had we had a client, or we have a client that's pretty big. They're from the US and born global, scale up. They spend a lot of money. And when we first initially they came to us, they spent approximately 80% of their paid investments on Google search, on paid search. And this, we're talking a lot of dollars, let's put it that way. Like, yeah, a lot of money every month. And before that, like up until that point, that was like, it was more, they were like coming to us and, hey, we need help. And they needed specifically help on the European region. And one of the things they were really adamant about was like, hey, they want to optimize, they want to make things better. And what we essentially challenged them on was like, hey, are you sure your investment is paying off? And it was really interesting. And I think that case was kind of like a little bit of an eye opener. I kind of knew it, but like, because when we started digging, they didn't actually know the real ROI of their channel. And of course, like there's a lot of attribution issues and blah, 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 but especially on paid search, that's less of a question typically. And when we analyzed it, we actually discovered that they have what I call a CAC payback. So a customer acquisition payback. So it means how long, for everyone who doesn't know, it means how long does it take for me to earn back what it cost me to buy a customer, essentially. And that took them at least 4 years. So it took them they acquired a customer, it took them 4 years before they had earned back the break even on the paid spend only. And in case you're wondering, that's really bad. That's typically in the best case scenarios for some of our clients, we have CAC paybacks of 6 to 12 months. That's the best. Sometimes you have a little bit more, up to 24. But 4 years, that's too much for you. And because you don't include salaries, you don't include product development, sales, all that stuff, right? It's too much. And they didn't know, right? And once we highlighted that, like it was a bit of a mind shift. Like it was like kind of, hey, we're doing this thing that we're transitioning over to. And I think when you have to convince internally your stakeholders about what you're doing, it's a lot about that mind shift change. Like it has to be about that, because attribution wise, this is a lot harder than anything you ever had to do. Like essentially, because we have another client right now where they've doubled the amount of direct traffic, they've doubled their brand searches, and they've more than quadrupled their pipeline since we started working with them. So it's like really good. But the thing is, we can't really attribute all of the things we do. Like they have self-reported attribution. They're about to implement some attribution software that will help a bit. But fundamentally, they can't actually prove that it's from us. Like they're like, okay, it started right after we started working. So like, okay, it's kind of correlated. But those issues, like we can't actually prove it. And I think so it's more like saying, okay, your pipeline is looking better. All the leading indicators are pointing in the right direction. There's no UTM source doesn't work because of cookie tracking and ITP and all that jazz, but we can see it's working. Like something's working here. We're doing the right thing. And I think it's a lot more trust-based than it used to be. Because back in the day, as you refer to, there was like these like, hey, we just want leads tomorrow, give me leads tomorrow, right? Well, here they took a whim. So like the first 3 months didn't look too good. The next 3 months after it looked amazing, and now it's looking killing it, right? And I think that's the process. So strategically for bigger scale ups, it's shifting your budget, and you can do it slowly. A lot of people think they're like, okay, we just cut off Google Ads and then move transition everything over from lead gen to or low intent or high intent stuff to this. But essentially, it's more about just saying like slowly shifting, because you also want to make sure that stuff like if you have a sales team, they don't dry up, right? They typically will if you just do it one day to the next. So you want to do a slow transition over time. But most people, if they really did like something like a CAC payback analysis, they would find their investment was not paying off in the bigger side. Actually, 9 out of 10 cases we do that, we find it doesn't, it's not a good investment. So that was the big side of things. On the small side of things, you wanna, there's a lot more it's a lot more bet swinging. So when you have bigger cases, they can afford to have a lot of different motions running. They can have account-based marketing, they can have thought leadership, they can run product-led growth, they can have always on stuff. They can have a lot of different what I call motions running. It's hard to do that in a small startup. Like if you're, let's say you're 10 man, 20 man, 50 man even, then you have to make some executive bets. Like you have to say, these are the 3 things we believe in will work. And I always believe if you haven't done marketing before, start at the bottom of the funnel, like I explained before. See if you can convert some of the people who are out there looking for a category. If your category doesn't exist, then it's just important that you take a stance in the market. Like you take some sort of unique angle that you bring to the table, and then you figure out what is our distribution method, where do people hang out? But it could be LinkedIn, could be Facebook, Twitter, whatever. That's up to your brand and your product in this case. But you take that unique stance and then you push it as hard as you can. And that's actually like that's the strategy for smaller players. I believe a lot in what I call channel diversification, and I believe that doing that quite early. A lot of people are like, find the channel that works and then just go crazy. Don't get me wrong, that's relatively solid advice. But I also believe in like, let's say you find out that LinkedIn is a good channel for you. Investing a little bit in having Facebook running, having some YouTube shorts running, having Instagram, having Twitter, investing a little bit, not a lot, but like a little bit on retargeting and just making gives you this kind of like omni-channel feeling. Let me give you a good example. When we were 50 people at Templafy back when I worked there, we closed a very big customer, one of the big ones, biggest consulting firms in the world, top 4, very big. And I think it was the CMO, if I recall correctly. And she came in and what she said was like, never changed my life a bit. Because she said on the call with the sales, I don't know how you guys do it, but I see you guys everywhere. Everywhere you go. Like you're on LinkedIn, you're on Facebook, you're on these like news sites. I don't know, I can't get rid of you. You're everywhere. You must have a huge marketing budget and a huge team. And we were like 3 people in marketing. And we didn't have a big budget. And that was this omni-channel feeling that a lot of people talk about. But you can replicate that in a small startup. It doesn't require a lot of budget. It just requires like a little bit of focus and then spread out. So that was a long rant, but I hope that makes sense.
It does, and that's a very interesting example from Templafy. So thanks for sharing that. I do want to take a hard right at this point, Casper, and want to talk about data because
Yes.
I enjoy this subject and I feel like there's so much to unearth here. But I also have a bit of a personal take. I don't believe that there is a single silver bullet of sorts for metrics and measurement. I mean, better performance data and more stronger customer insights, let's say, I know they make for better conversations in explaining that choosing between brand and demand is never a zero-sum game, at least in our B2B world. But what's your take on the whole data measurement and sort of balancing the metrics between the right KPIs for brand, right KPIs for demand, and maybe also having a sort of middle ground there?
That's a great question. I think fundamentally, all things in marketing should be tied back to revenue. Let's start there. So if you're not tying your marketing efforts back to revenue today, there's something wrong. Like we're talking to a company right now, and they only want to be measured at MQLs. And we already flagged them and told them, hey guys, this is not great. Like it's not awesome. Like feel free to do it, but it's probably not going to be with us. right? Because fundamentally, like that's just not like there's been so many cases like MQL, SQL, and technically the definitions are actually not the problem. I think a lot of people mistake that and think that this problem is with MQL, SQL. No, it's not. The problem is how people understand them and use them, right? Like so essentially what you want to be measured on is close won customers, but if you can't do that, you want to take a step back and look at weighted pipeline. So weighted pipeline is typically my golden metric for everything I do. And that means that if marketing is generating pipeline, and when I call it weighted, it means that let's say you have in your opportunity stage, you have 100%, then from the opportunity stage might be close 50%. Then the 50% is your weighted number in pipeline. I'm simplifying here. But so weighted pipelines, marketing sourced weighted pipeline. That's actually the one I go for the most of the time. But, and here's the but, typically in a lot of cases, especially when there's sales teams involved, it takes a bit of time to generate weighted pipeline. It's not like it doesn't happen overnight. There's demos, there's stakeholder management, all these kind of different processes, right? So here you want to have some what I call leading indicators. And then here MQL, SQL, SAOs, all these kind of different metrics step in and become really valuable. As long as you keep tying them back to revenue and to weighted pipeline, close won revenue, then you're in the good. You can have leading indicators. We use a lot of brand search impressions, direct traffic, and a good mixture of those. We also look at key page sessions, so stuff like are more people visiting the right pages on your site. Those are also leading indicators, and I think that's kind of where I've changed my stance, because I used to be back in the day, I was like, yeah, that's vanity metrics and stuff. I don't believe that's the case anymore. I just think it's leading indicators, and all metrics can tell you a story. It's just like you shouldn't rely solely on them. I think so. As long as you get to the point where they call weighted pipeline, then however you get there is relatively up to you. Let's call it that.
Right. And tell me, Casper, is there one thing that has worked phenomenally well for you when it came to actually packaging some of this data and presenting it to, say, the executive and the leadership committee for better alignment, for more budgets, just getting all the stakeholders on the same page, what have you?
Well, that is weighted pipeline. We use the term, we call it growth vitals. So here we look at different stages and metrics, different stages, right? Like we just started a project with a customer, and here we can't really look at the pipeline because we kicked off ads, what is it, 2 weeks ago, right? So it's just like, okay, there's no pipeline yet, not of note, right? So we can't really. So the executive team were like, so we show, here's all the metrics we look at now. Here's all the metrics we look at in 3 months. Here's all the metrics we look at in 12 months, right? So I think the answer is like, whenever you want to align with your executive team, you need to talk revenue. There's no other, like, they don't get anything else, right? Let's be real. You can paint the picture and say like, hey, here's all the metrics that matter, and that's good, and that's what I do. But if you don't end up talking revenue at any point of that conversation, you're not going to win. Like you're just going to get steamrolled.
Tell me, Casper, when it comes to the B2B landscape as a whole, what are some of the things that you're super excited about that are either happening at the moment or that you see happening in the coming months and years?
The one thing I'm really excited about is just like people are starting to do the right things. Like don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people who don't, but more and more people are, at least from a mindset perspective, a change to be like, dude, they're doing more demand generation, they're doing more, their ads are more open, they're testing more things, they look more. It's been super healthy to have these tracking issues. Like tracking used to be really good, like better. It's technically funny that you go back in time to have better tracking, but technically we had better tracking 5-10 years ago, right? And tracking getting worse actually made most marketeers better. Like some of them at least, because like suddenly, like when you can't measure anything, like anything goes, right? Like all your good ideas are suddenly on the table. Like if you can't measure the outcome of your podcast, suddenly why the fuck not make a podcast, right? So it opens up a whole world of opportunities, and I think that's cool. I think that's really nice. I really like that. On the other side of the coin, I'm not a huge I like everything that's going on with AI, but I'm also super it's not really. We use AI a lot ourselves. Don't get me wrong, but I always use it. This is my example. So the good marketeers, they become incredibly great with AI, right? So take someone like you and I, or excuse me, I become really good when I get AI in my hands, right? Like I go from good to great, hopefully. And but my worry is, and what I see happening is that you take some bad marketeers and you give them AI in their hands, and it doesn't really make them great. It just makes them mediocre, but now it makes them at least do stuff. And that stuff is shit most of the time. So I've seen a lot of, like, you see a lot of these, like, see ads where it's just like literally mid-journey pictures with the headlines. I'm like, come on. Like you see all these like fake twin avatar videos producing, like, happening all the time. That stuff scares me a little bit. Like I'm not want to be an old school, but it's like that's, yeah, I'm not loving that part. But in terms of producing ads and speeding up processes and taking care of mundane tasks, I'm loving it. Like I think AI is definitely very interesting in the marketing space.
And what's your take on the whole new privacy world that we're entering into with third-party cookies and all of that? How do you see that sort of playground changing for us as marketeers?
It's not going to get easier. Let's put it that way. Uh, well, so here's the thing. I've never been a huge privacy proponent. Like I'm never fully like. I understand there's some core issues out here on privacy that we need to solve. That's why these things are happening. And I totally agree and respect that. Don't get me wrong. With that said, like what has happened on the cookie side and privacy front is not actually beneficial. Because, like, let's say, so what happens here when you get less tracking? What actually happens is less tracking equals less personalization, right? So when you go to a site, you want to go to, I don't know, Temu or some one of those big sites. And instead of in the past 5 years ago, you would have gotten, you were looking at shoes. Maybe you would get some other shoes or like shoe laces or I don't know, like stuff, right? Instead, now you get, I don't know, fishing nets or fishing poles or something. It's not related, but it's retargeting, right? Like it's targeting you because you've been to the site. We can see that, but we can't see who you are or what you clicked on or whatever. So when tracking goes down, your web experience actually also goes down. And that's not how I want it to be. And most people, the tracking, so I think we need to get to a point where we say, okay, here's all the tracking things we think is fine. Like that I can see that you're from a Chrome browser, that you come from Copenhagen, Denmark, and that you've been clicking around on our website looking at these things. I think that's fine. I shouldn't be able to see that your name is Nandita and you have all these preferences of blah blah blah. That's, I don't want to see that. But the anonymized data, why not? Like I don't feel like that's hurting anyone. That's actually just making things better. So I think it's only going to get worse than the tracking side. Like we're only, like, the tracking measures are only going to get worse. There's a lot of stuff happening these days, and it's only going to get worse. So the whole, it's good that marketeers are changing because it's not, yeah, as I said, it's not going to get easier. I think that's the two lines.
Right. And just in the face of change, Casper, how are you kind of staying on top of everything that's going on, not just in terms of new things that are coming up, but also just sort of keeping yourself a little updated with, marketing trends. A lot of the work that you're doing with SparkForce, which technically requires you to stay on top of everything, and hustle around. How are you balancing the act?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard. And I think, to be honest, like as I've transitioned more and more into like more of a founder CEO role, so I have, like, I'm leading, we're 14 people, right? Like I need to manage a team, I need to pay salaries, I need to pay our bills, and I need to manage clients and all that stuff. It's hard, and don't get me wrong. But so simple version. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I do my own podcast and talk here, like, and actually, one of the things I can recommend to other marketeers out there, if you want to be sharp at something, talk about it. And it doesn't matter if you post on LinkedIn or you post on Twitter, do a podcast or you do a talk in an event or something. Because I always say that when I teach these social selling courses. And when I always teach, I always say to people, when you post on LinkedIn or when you do something active like speak on a podcast, it forces you to think about why you do what you do. Why do you do these things? Like why do you actually do these things? Think about that. Like why do you set up text stats on LinkedIn? Well, because it gives this and this. Okay, cool. If you can't explain that, then you fundamentally might have a problem, right? So keeping myself sharp is a lot about listening to podcasts, listening to events, talking at on LinkedIn, sharing my opinion and having these like debates. That's super healthy. I'm part of a lot of communities like Exit5 and a bunch of Copenhagen-based SaaS communities and stuff like that, Sassiest and all those things. And then I don't read a lot of books. I wish I could say, hey, yeah, I read a ton of books, that I'm not, unfortunately, not that guy. I read one or two a year, but those books typically I tend to matter. So I recommend that. But most of the time it's just like podcasting is a big player for me, and and talking about the things I do is a big player. I think that's the most. I'm lucky to be in a situation where I'm surrounded by like really smart marketeers, right? Like I'm really like I have a really strong team. So I have like the best of paid search, I have the best of paid social, I have the best of copyright, and best of video. Like I'm surrounded by really smart people. So I get to spar a lot on marketing on a day-to-day with like going on in platforms. So what I look for outside of the platforms are things that we might not be doing or outside our wheelhouse.
That's great. And I'm kind of down to the time I had in mind, Casper, but before I let you go, any closing thoughts?
No, thanks for having me. It's good, and thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
And maybe I might ask you to do a quick 1 minute spiel on the latest social selling course that you've just launched, because it sounds incredible. And if it's okay to talk about it, I'd love for you to
Definitely.
do a quick spiel on that, because I think it could be very interesting for a lot of people.
I think that I would love to do that. Let's see if I can do it in 60 seconds. like, I think fundamentally, like this started back when I initially started understanding social selling as a thing back in 2017 when I was on LinkedIn for Templafy. And I started realizing this had a huge potential. So after that, I started teaching people at Templafy. And at some point, we generated more traffic to the site, engagement on our stuff, like from our organic presence than we did from our paid advertising. We were spending quite a significant sum of money. And that's what kind of when I realized I was onto something. And now these days I've grown it, and I did this course with Laura from Dream Data. She's awesome. And it's the main driver of business for SparkForce. Like it's the main thing. We do a lot of cool stuff, but this is the main driver. And I think fundamentally what I always say, like people buy from people. Like so people want to trust people. So if you like take a good example. So Richard Branson, like he has like 35 million followers on on LinkedIn. But he has like his biggest company, or one of the biggest, Virgin Atlantic, I don't know, they have 1 million followers. Like, and there's 6,000 employees, right? Like, and I know I use that as an example, saying, okay, but that's Casper, that's Richard Branson. But use me then as an example. I have 10,000 followers ish, but SparkForce has what, 2,000 or something, right? People follow other people, they trust people, they buy from people. Using that in your marketing strategy should be like in there. I don't believe you should start any company today. No company should be started today without having a founder who's active on LinkedIn. I think it should be a core part of your marketing strategy whenever. Your founder's biggest job is to push, if it's a funded, like if it's a VC backed, then he needs to get funding. He needs to get employees, attract new employees. That you also do on LinkedIn. He needs to attract potential buyers, customers, right? Those three things all happen the same place and all happen from that one activity. And it's worth so much more than you think. So if you haven't done this, like do it. And I want to use the last part of it to say, it's about like, imagine your personal brand is here forever. The company you work at today, you might not be there in 2 years. You might not be there in 1 year, right? Like most people, the company they work at today, they are not there in 2 years, especially in marketing, unfortunately. So they're not there in 2 years. But what's here in 2 years? Your personal brand. So you need to keep developing that. And if you come up at a job interview and somebody has a personal brand and the other one doesn't, I know who I'm picking. So if yeah, that's the fastest pitch I could do.